Let's take a look at sleeve construction. So the sleeves are comprised of 5 squares sewn together in this T formation. Now, no matter what size you're working, the sleeve is the same, so this applies to everyone. Now, this doesn't really look like a sleeve right now. The way it's constructed in the garment, it's going to be folded like this. And this is your armhole, and this is the wrist. And if you look at the finished garment I've got here, you've got this extra bit of knitting down here. So there's my square like that. So in order to get a nice shaped sleeve that tapers from the armhole to the wrist, we're going to pick up stitches here along the sides of our mitered squares and knit up. The direction of knitting would be this way. We're going to knit up and create some shaping here so that we can get a nice tapered sleeve. I'm going to show you how to do that next. So before we pick up stitches along this edge, you do need to sew your sleeve squares together. I neglected to mention that before, but it's quite simple and you can just use whip stitch as we looked at to seam our body pieces together. So once you have your squares in this T formation, we're going to begin picking up our first sleeve section at this end, at the bottom of that T. So I'm going to pick up 20 stitches along this square, 1 stitch in the seam, and 20 stitches along this square. Now the nice thing is you will have 20 ridges across here. So we're going to pick up 1 stitch for each garter ridge. And remember, the garter ridge looks like this. It actually equals 2 rows. And it has these top and bottom bumps. So the bottom is like a smile and the top is like a frown right there. So what I'm going to do is pick up stitches in each ridge, and I'm going to pick up that bump there. So I guess that's, if I'm looking at it that way, that's a frown bump, whatever's closest to the edge. So that's what I'm going to pick up here. There's another way you can pick up stitches that I'm going to show you after. So starting at this edge, I'm just going to take 1 needle. That's all I need for this. I'm going to find my edge stitch and insert my needle through. Then I'm going to take my main color yarn and lie it over there, and I'm just going to pull through a loop. And there's my first stitch picked up. This is a little difficult to see in the black, but once we get to the blue, you'll see it a little bit better. So I'm going through the very same edge stitch of my next garter ridge and pulling through a loop. And there's 2, there's 3, and it's easier to pull through if you tug a little bit with your left hand, put some tension on that loop, and then you can just pop that stitch right through. Now, if you knit continental style, you can do exactly the same thing, and you're just, now I'm not typically a continental knitter, so that's a little tricky for me, but you can pull it through just the same way. So I can continue going all the way across, picking up 1 stitch per ridge. And I like picking up those stitches this way because it looks pretty nice and neat on the opposite side. So another way you can do this, if you feel that picking up just that edge stitch isn't very secure, you can pick up in between the ridges. So the process is very much the same, just with 1 needle, except I'm going in between the ridges and picking up 2 bars. Again, difficult to see in the black, but we'll be able to see it better when I get these first 4 stitches picked up. So this is a stronger seam, but it is bulkier. Oops, I missed one there. So now you can see in the blue, I've got one strand on the edge there. I've got a second strand on the edge. That's my very edge stitch, and I'm going to insert my needle just under there. So if you can see that, right under those two strands that are in between my garter ridges. So in this case, on the wrong side, I have a much bigger ridge, and it won't lie as flat, but if you're worried about durability, that's a stronger way to pick up your stitches. In this method, I'm going to pick up those bumps along the side, just like I did with the first method, but I'm going to put it all on a circular needle first before I bring in my yarn and start knitting them. Now, this is good because your stitches aren't knit yet, and if your pickup is a little bit off and you need to adjust the numbers, there's no harm done. There's no undoing your knitting. You just remove the needle. So all I'm going to do is pick up those stitches with a circular needle so that they're all ready to knit. I'll show you what that looks like. Now, this is much easier to do with a circular needle that is a few sizes smaller than your gauge size needle. That isn't listed in the materials. You could try it out with the circular needle that's one size smaller than your gauge size, but the smaller the needle, the easier it is to pick up the stitches and place them on the needle. So just as previously, I'm going to be working into the edge of that garter ridge, that little bump there. But I'm not going to knit it. I'm not going to join my main color yarn. I'm simply going to insert my needle through the edge, through each stitch, and sort of load them on my needle to knit later on. So you can see this is much quicker. And you will need a double pointed needle or a circular needle because I'm going to start knitting on this edge, on this side. So I need to have this, I can't have a stopper there. That's going to prevent me from knitting in this direction again. So let's see how many I have here. I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Perfect. So I've got my 20 stitches from my first square, and now this part is going to apply no matter how you pick up these stitches. You're going to find a place to pick up a stitch right at the seam. So I'm going to first take a look at what I want to pick up on my second square. I'm going to be working into these stitches, so I don't want to pick that first stitch and get my count off. I'm going to go down into here, just where my seam has been worked. And I'm going to find one strand just to insert my needle under. And then I'm going to continue picking up those bumps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on my second square. Let's see if this works out. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And I'm going to go right in there. You can fudge a little bit at the beginning and the end. That's where adjustments are not going to be as noticeable. So now I have all my stitches, for all 41 stitches that I need, loaded onto a needle. And it doesn't matter that it's a couple of sizes smaller, because it's the needle that you knit with that is going to determine the gauge, not the needle that you're knitting off of, if that makes any sense. So from here, I will just knit my 41 stitches. And it is going to be a little tight because these aren't these are stitches that have already been knit, right? These loops that we have on our needle. So there you have it. There's a third way to pick up your stitches along the side of your edge. So after you've picked up your 41 stitches along these two squares on your sleeve, you're going to knit back and forth, knit every row garter stitch on those 41 stitches until you've got 2.5 inches from your picked up row. And that's when the shaping begins. So you're going to end on a wrong side row so that your shaping will begin with the right side facing, and the shaping's beginning at this, what's going to be the wrist side edge of your sleeve. The shaping is done just by casting off stitches at the beginning of a row. Super simple. So where it says shape side first row, right side, the first shaping row begins by casting off 3 stitches. So let's just review that really quickly. To cast off 3 stitches, I'm going to begin with knitting 2, and then I'm going to use my left hand needle to take my first knit stitch and pass it over the second. So that's, I've cast off 1 stitch, knit another, do the same thing, pull it over, cast off 2, cast off 3. And from here, I'm just going to knit to the end of the row. Here I've knit to the end of that first row of shaping, and you can see now I have 3 less stitches. I have 38 stitches on my needle, and those cast off stitches are just hanging out down here. So my second row and all of the wrong side rows are just knit across. That's it. After you've worked row 1 and 2 7 times, you're going to have 7 little steps here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we're going to increase the number of stitches that we're going to cast off at the beginning of each right side row. So now we're going to cast off 4 stitches at the beginning of my next right side row. So all the shaping is worked on the right side, which gives us all of the shaping on this side of the work. If you've got a stair step on this side, you know you've done something wrong. So now I'm going to cast off 4 stitches exactly how I did before by knitting 2 stitches, pulling the first knit stitch over the second. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then knit to the end of the row. Then on my next row, the wrong side row, row 2, I'm going to knit, and then I'm going to repeat those last 2 rows 3 times more, or 4 times total, and you'll be left with 4 stitches that you will just cast off. So once you've worked all of your shaping rows, you'll have this nice diagonal line of stair step shaping, and now our work equals the height of the square beside it, and we're going to sew this up later. So once you're down to your last 4 stitches here, after all your shaping has been completed, you're just going to cast off the last 4 stitches, and this time we're casting off on the right side row. And then I can cut that, leaving a tail to sew this together later. But now we have to repeat this on the other side. So now that I've completed my first sleeve section on this side, I have to repeat the same thing, a mirror image of it, on the other side of my sleeve. So most of the shaping and the work is exactly the same as we outlined on this side, but there's a couple of key differences. One is here we picked up stitches beginning at the wrist side edge of the work. This time we're starting over here in sort of this you know, not the center of the sleeve, but in the midst of the sleeve. And on this side, we were picking up stitches along the sides of garter ridges. We're along the sides of these rows. This time, we're looking at bound off stitches from the mitered squares. So now I'm going to take my main color yarn and start picking up stitches for my edge here. And let's take a look at that bound off edge. Again, it looks like a nice row of V's. And I'm going to pick up one side of that V, that bound off stitch, all the way along to pick up my 41 stitches. So beginning in this very first one, I'm going to use one of the same techniques we outlined before, where I'm just going to pull that loop through. And then I'm going to go to the next stitch and pull that loop through. So on this edge, you can't really use that trick that that I showed you with the smaller needle, the double pointed or circular needle where you load all the stitches up first. That's going to be a little trickier. So I prefer to do it this way. Now, if you worked under both loops, I think that is also an option under both of those V's, but again, that is going to create a bulkier edge. So it's up to you, whatever you prefer, as long as you are consistent all the way across. That's all that matters. So once you have your 41 stitches picked up along this edge, so 20 from this square, 20 from this square, 1 in your seam, then the shaping is exactly the same as this side, except you're going to begin the shaping, you're going to do all your shaping on the wrong side row. So on this side, we did our cast off stair step shaping. We were casting off at the beginning of right side rows. On this side, you're going to cast off beginning on the wrong side rows so that your shaping is mirrored. So go ahead and do your shaping for your second sleeve section. And then of course, repeat that on your second sleeve, and we'll move on to our next step. So when your side sleeve sections are complete, they're going to look like this. And you might be a little concerned about this stair step edge here not being very smooth, but that's going to be hidden in a seam when everything is completed. So we're going to work that later, but I'll just show you on the finished sleeve. This is the seamed, that's the two stair step edges of your sleeve seamed together, and it's perfectly smooth. It doesn't look like a stair step zigzaggy uneven seam. It looks great. So we'll do that later, but for now, we need to complete our sleeve by sewing up the edge of our shaped section to this mitered square. So I've left a nice long tail that I'm going to use to work my seam. And because I've cast off up here, I'm starting my seam at the open edge, but you can absolutely start at this side and join a new piece of yarn. It doesn't really matter what side you start from. And just like before, I'm going to be working into a cast off edge on my mitered square, and I'm going to be working into the sides of stitches at each garter ridge on my shaped section here of garter stitch. So because I've got my tail on my garter stitch ridge section, I'm going to begin over here on my cast off edge. And so I've got my V's of my cast off. They kind of roll to the wrong side of the work. I'm going to catch the leg of that V that's furthest away from me. And then I'm going to catch the first edge stitch, which is a little distorted because it's at the cast off there. And I'm going to pull that through. And then I'm just going to consistently work into the same one leg at one side of my work on my mitered square, and I'm going to work into the adjacent piece. On the next ridge, I'm going to catch that edge of that stitch. Pulling it a little bit snug as I go. I'll just do a few more and we'll take a look at that. So if your work doesn't line up, you can see that's pretty nice and invisible, pretty flat, and it looks nice on both sides. And if your work, if you have maybe one extra garter ridge or one less, garter stitch is pretty forgiving. It's very squishy, so you can kind of ease that in as you go by skipping a place or working into the same stitch twice. If you only need to do that once or twice, it's going to even up great, and your seam is still going to look fantastic. So do that on both sides of your sleeve shaping, on both sleeves, and then we'll get to our next step. Week 3 is the same for all sizes. Sew your squares together into right and left sleeves using a flat seam and following the assembly diagram. Then pick up and knit your sleeve side sections. That's it for week 3. Happy knitting, and see you next time.